Welcome. This presentation is a basic introduction to climatic design. It introduces the idea of comfort, the bioclimatic chart, climate zone systems, and it also illustrates some of the many possible design implications of designing in different climates. We begin with the notion that climate is a fundamental context for design. These two images both show river valleys, the Rio Grande in Albuquerque and the Columbia River between Oregon and Washington. One hot and dry, with green life a thin border along the river, the other lush and temperate. The plants are different, the animals, soils, and hydrology are different. The ecosystems themselves are very different. Everything in nature adapts to the context of its place. From the perspective of climatic design, humans and their buildings also will live well when fit to their natural context. So let's start with this notion of thermal comfort. Here's the basic ISO definition of comfort. That condition of mind which expresses satisfaction with the thermal environment. That's like saying comfort is when you feel or experience that you are comfortable. You might ask, so what? What does comfort have to do with architecture, and can we say anything meaningful about the conditions people find comfortable? And if we could, then so what? How would that change design? If the proposition here is accurate, that is, if we could define the conditions that create comfort in some empirically based way, in a way that is statistically significant and replicable, would that be useful? Would it change something about how we design? Well, one thing it might point to is the fallacy of a kind of radical relativism popular today. You've heard the "it's just your opinion" argument about design. It would also suggest that there's some knowledge available to designers to inform their art. It would say that while formulaic determinism is maybe not possible, neither is absolute radical pluralism. At least with regards to architectural design responses that shape buildings to bring about that condition of mind which expresses satisfaction with the thermal environment. So let's start here. This is the bioclimatic chart. It's developed a number of years ago and modified by various people, including Ed Ahrens and others at Berkeley, and originally Victor Olcay in his highly influential 1963 book, Design with Climate. It basically says that comfort can be defined as the combination of variables: temperature, humidity, solar radiation, shade, and air movement, and so forth. And in the middle here we have what's called the comfort zone. So notice that we have relative humidity across the horizontal axis. We have dry bulb temperature, or regular temperature that you'd measure on a thermometer, you can think of it that way, measured on the vertical axis. And some combination of temperatures and humidities yields some conditions that most people, about 80% of the people, would report as being comfortable. It turns out that very few conditions actually make everybody comfortable, even when all the external conditions are accounted for, like clothing and activity level. People have different metabolic rates and body types and ages, and all of these affect this balance of heat in an individual. So nevertheless, though, these relatively fixed elements of building design could respond to these statistical norms. So the theoretical proposition is sort of on three levels: that the fixed building elements might be shaped to address the majority of conditions, and that then some movable elements of architecture, windows, openings, shading, and so forth, might address much of the remaining variation, and that intelligent active systems can solve for either extreme conditions, really hot times or really cold times, and these kinds of outlying aspects of human variability, the few percentage of people that find themselves too warm or too cold, while most of the other people are comfortable. So let's break this chart down. Basically, if you're above the comfort zone, we say you're too hot. If it's below the comfort zone, then it's too cold. Notice there's a shading line. So if we're in the comfort zone, that says that we're in the shade, and if we're above the comfort zone, we'll also assume that you're in the shade. Also, there's a wind line at the top of the comfort zone, so conditions in the comfort zone require that wind not be moving. If you add wind, then you're going to feel cooler. And this can be a positive or a negative depending on where those conditions lie. However, we can look at this diagram on the right, the extension of the comfort zone with wind, which says that if you add wind or air movement of some kind to conditions that are above the comfort zone, within some limitations, you can expand that comfort zone or sort of slide it up into the warmer regions so that conditions that ordinarily would be perceived as warm or hot would suddenly become comfortable. The same thing can be said of adding radiation or sun. Again, looking at the diagram on the right, the bottom of the comfort zone can slide down into colder conditions if we add increasing degrees of solar radiation. So if you're standing out in the sun, even though it might be cool, you could still be comfortable. And the third expansion of the comfort zone is with evaporation. So again, looking at the diagram on the right side of the screen, notice that the expansion of the comfort zone this time, that is the single hatched area, extends mostly over to the left side of the graph, that is the area of low relative humidity. So if it's hot and dry and you add moisture through evaporation, that's something we call evaporative cooling, then you will take those conditions that are perceived as warm and dry and they may be perceived as comfortable. Here's a monthly plot for Phoenix, Arizona. Each line represents a typical month during the year. It's a 12-month plot. Notice that there are 2 dots for each line, one for the cold early morning and one for the warmer mid-afternoon. The low temperature is paired with high humidity, while the high temperature is paired with the low humidity. Recall, if you may, that this is because warm air holds more moisture than cool air, so for about the same amount of water mass in the air, the afternoon high temperature has a lower relative humidity. This kind of plot is useful to see what changes in climatic variables might bring different days in that location back towards comfort conditions. Let's look at what drives the climate that we find in different places, which, as Corbu illustrates, can either be the friend or the enemy of architecture and its inhabitants. Climate is a fundamental force acting on buildings, and the sun is its most powerful agent. In the hot and dry climate of Phoenix, Frank Lloyd Wright initially designed Taliesin West as a winter retreat. Yet it has many hot and dry climate adaptations, including massive walls, shaded outdoor circulation, and a range of spaces with variations in enclosure that can be used at different times of the year. The pool that you see is also strategically placed for the breezes to cross it before entering the building. Phoenix is hot and dry, but as you can see, it's also cool and dry in the winter. It has mild temperatures and plenty of sun, so most of the building can be heated just by passive solar. In summer, the temperatures rise well above the natural ventilation zone, so evaporative cooling and night cool mass strategies become necessary. Looking at some other hot and dry places, in Pakistan, wind catchers orient to a dominant prevailing wind direction and solve a problem that happens in cities where an upwind building blocks the wind access of lee-side structures. So these things, you can see, they stick up and they're really pointing in a singular direction. If the winds came from 2 different directions, then the tower head would have a different design to capture it from 2 different directions. In Egypt on the right, the courtyard type helps one part of the building shade other parts of the building. And the openings here, as you can see, even when they're facing the courtyard, are shaded, and the harsh light is filtered by wooden screens. While we're talking about hot climates, let's explore the sun just a bit. The sun path is something that's knowable. It's a phenomenon that has great potential impact on architecture and urban form. This is a polar plot of a sun chart, and the sun position can be found by combining 2 measures: altitude, which is the angle above the horizon, and azimuth, which is the horizontal angle from south. The concentric circles on this graph measure the altitude. The radial lines mark the azimuth. The bold horizontal arcs represent months, while the vertical arcs mark the hours of the day. Note that except for December 21st, the winter solstice, and June 21st, the summer solstice, each monthly line represents sun angles for 2 months on opposite sides of the solstices. For example, October and February have the same sun angles. Turn the chart upside down if you're in the southern hemisphere. The sun and its path drive the climate. The sun is also a fundamental driver of design. The ancient Anasazi at Mesa Verde found relief from these seasonal extremes by locating their settlement under a large south-facing natural rock overhang. This provided significant shade in the summer when the sun is high and allowed their high-mass buildings to be heated by the sun in the winter. They also used a high-mass construction, which helped to delay the heat that did strike the buildings into the evening, and they also used a pattern of migration, so they would go out and sleep outdoors in the cooler evening. Luconde used layers of shading in the National Assembly building in Dakar. Light is either reflected from shielded clear stories or from windows that face relatively protected outdoor spaces. So you can see there's no outside windows here facing the sun. The windows are set back inside those little courtyards. Or they're coming from above in some kind of shielded way. The result is a cooler, massive, shaded interior that's lighted indirectly. Notice that the source of the light is obscured, reducing both glare and heat gain from the intense Bangladeshi sun. In hot climates and moderate Mediterranean climates, one will often find shaded, unconditioned exterior space or circulation, as in this building by Anant Rajay in Bhopal, India. This is the Institute for Forest Management, and it doesn't have any heated or cooled circulation. Instead, the architecture has a looser boundary between inside and outside. All along this corridor are open-air seating areas with securable rooms that open onto it. There are also more variations in Indian architecture in the enclosure of outdoor rooms, such as the right image, a 2-story outdoor room defined by concrete and stone arches. The interior spaces are protected by many variations on spatial layers of shading. A window is never located on the outermost skin. So see in the upper right, there's an entire almost additional facade on the outside of the actual enclosure facade that holds the windows. And then in the lower right you can also see there's a kind of grid of space that projects in front of the windows to help to shade them. And the windows themselves don't reach all the way down to the floor because it'd be too hard to shade them there. Similarly, in Gandhi's house at the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, again in India, the circulation is organized around the edge of a courtyard and under an arcade. The largest and most public room for receiving visitors is completely open on one side. So this is an architecture that's born of a hot climate with no use of cooling machines. Remember and practice your solar yoga. The solar yoga technique is one way to always remember the motions of the sun and to integrate that into your body. Returning to our climate types, cool climate buildings are first about reducing heat loss and then also about increasing solar gain and storing it. In a cool and cloudy climate like England, that's the image on the upper left, one wants to make windows larger for light, but the windows also lose a lot of heat, especially at night. So the English developed heavy curtains to insulate the windows and tapestries to hang on the walls, and then little thermal enclaves, as you can see, around the bed for sleeping at night. The pioneer cabins in the U.S., that's on the upper right, use thick logs and small windows. So they're doing everything possible with a compact form, a thick wall, and the wood is actually really pretty good as an insulator when it gets that thick. And then not only did they not have access to large glazing technology, but windows are losing the most heat, so having them small really helped. And then in Finland, in the lower image, the sod roof has been used for centuries to slow down the heat flow through the roof. So knowing where the winter wind is as important in a cool climate as knowing where the summer wind is in a hot climate. Ideally, the summer and the winter winds come from different directions, allowing one side of the site or the building to open up to the summer breeze and the other side to block the winter winds. These are German houses that use slate, normally a roofing material, but they're using it on the walls in this case to shield the house from cold winds and blowing rain that comes up a mountainside in a very predictable direction. So note that the upper house also has rolled down exterior metal storm shutters only on the windy side, and the lower house uses traditional shutters all the way around. So not only are they blocking the rain out and the wind that's coming from that predictable direction in the winter, they're also able to really, in a storm, shutter down the house. The igloo minimizes the ratio of skin area to interior volume. So less surface area means less heat loss. On the right is the bioclimatic chart for Madison, Wisconsin, which shows winter days below freezing and the warmest months of July just barely breaking the comfort zone. So clearly reducing heat loss and increasing solar gain are priorities in that type of a climate. These are images from Quebec City in Canada. These are 18th century buildings that are double glazed. So you can see two complete layers of windows there before the thermal pane window technology was invented. So the glazing pane is also located on the outer surface of the wall, and that position maximizes how much light can be collected. If this was in a hot climate, remember the pictures from India, the glass would be typically recessed to create more shading. Also note the small operable areas for summer ventilation. In the right window, only 1/5 of the window is operable, and the left window has 1/4 operable. But there's also a little small vertical ventilation area with perforations that allow just a little bit of fresh air to come through if desired. On the other hand, if we were looking at a hot climate, we might see 50 to 100% of the window area being operable. This project points up the importance of orientation. These are row houses in Stuttgart, and the street itself is not ideally oriented for winter solar collection, so it's not oriented on the cardinal directions, and so the south collection area and the south facade is canted towards the south to increase the collection of that winter radiation. And note that there's also overhanging shading on top and operable awning windows, and there's some retracted operable shades that you can see for use in summer. The lower left image shows the north side, which has much less glazing. So the glazing is really always going to be a net thermal loss if it's on the north side, whereas on the south side it's actually a benefit. The third edition of Sun, Wind, and Light provides a method to navigate by climate. This image is from the Navigation by Climate section. It helps to direct the user to strategies that are likely to work well in different climate types. So the notion is you find your climate zone, then you can really look at what the weighting is between heating and cooling on a kind of typical basis in that climate. That sets a basic kind of climate condition type, and then the methodology goes further to let you adjust that for internal gains, and then move over to lists of strategies that are likely to work in that particular climate. Well, I hope you're beginning to see the value of considering climate as a context for design. As the Indian architect Charles Correa once said, climate is a powerful progenitor of form.